Hey guys. So last week we talked about how in this uncertain time we're in, we've actually had in many ways a blessing that we haven't really been looking for, but I hope you've considered, which is the removal of these distractions and amusements that have caused us to not consider deeply. So it's one thing to remove some things from your life, but then you have to put some things in its place. And so today we're going to be talking about a very specific strategy, a very specific behavior that you can now begin to implement during this time of uncertainty, which will be certain to bring you joy on the other side. So we are in a very difficult season right now, and part of the difficulty is it seems like every morning when we wake up, there's more news. In fact, it's kind of a joke at my household with Michelle and I, where we say, well, let's see what today brings, and we'll watch the news just to see what new loss has been foisted upon us. For example, we have a loss of the freedom that we had earlier to visit with whoever we want, that we have to isolate a little bit to prevent this spread. We have the loss of our ability to gather, whether it's in homes with family or at churches or at just meetings in general. We have the loss of sports seasons. We have the loss of graduations. We have the loss of weddings, really the loss of everything that's on our calendar. And the weight of all these cumulative losses, coupled with the weight of the unknown, of the uncertainty of the times we live in, well, it's actually left many of us experiencing a loss it's far more profound and far more intimate than the loss of our amusements or expectations. You see, in this season, many of us, well, we're experiencing a loss of joy. The dictionary defines joy as delightful gladness. And I think it's safe to say that all of us right now and anytime would actually love to experience delightful gladness. And maybe you've started to understand you're missing something, and so you've been trying to manifest joy. You've been trying to create joy. You've been trying to just struggle to bring it out, but maybe in this season you've become resigned to, at least now, at least during this time we live in, it's just not possible to have it. But I hope today, at the end of this message, that actually you will have found, as I have in reviewing this, that there's a path that's available to all of us at any season to delightful gladness, to joy. You see, the Bible tells us that joy is a fruit of the Spirit, which means this. It means it's a byproduct. It's a natural development from all these various other factors at play, which is why if you're just trying to struggle like I have in my life, if you're just trying to bear down, to gut it out, to get joy, well, it's not going to happen. No amount of struggling or straining for it is going to bring you joy. You see, when you pass by an orchard and there's apple trees, do you ever see an apple tree that's just struggling, bearing down? Oh, an apple. It just doesn't work that way. That's not how fruit is produced. You see, there's a process. That fruit is a byproduct. It's a natural development from all these other factors at play. Healthy fruit is dependent upon the health of the tree, and a tree is dependent upon the health of the soil, and the soil is always and 100% dependent upon what we put into it. And so the Bible, it tells us that our hearts, and again, as a review, what is our hearts? It's important. Well, our heart is what we think about, the emotions these thoughts give birth to, and the behaviors that those emotions create. And the Bible tells us that our heart, all those things, well, that's the soil. That's the soil that determines the fruit which we will experience within all of our lives. And the Bible makes it very clear that joy springs from a grateful heart. And since the loss of joy is so easy and so prevalent during these times, I just thought it would be helpful to look at a strategy, an actual strategy to both discovering and maintaining joy during this season. And so we're going to start looking here at in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 17, verses 11 through 19. And it's a story about Jesus encountering some lepers. And it came about while he was on the way to Jerusalem, this is Jesus, that he was passing between Samaria and Galilee. And he entered a certain village, and 10 leprous men who stood at a distance met him. And they raised their voices, saying, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. And when he saw them, he said to them, Go and show yourselves to the priests. And it came about as they were going, they were cleansed. Now one of them, when he saw that he had been healed, turned back, glorifying God with a loud voice. And he fell on his face at his feet, giving thanks to him. And he was a Samaritan. And Jesus answered and said, Were there not 10 cleansed? But the 9, where are they? Was no one found who turned back to give glory to God except this foreigner? And he said to him, Rise and go your way. Your faith has made you well. Let me just give you a little backstory on where this would have occurred. This village where this encounter would have occurred would have been about 2 to 3 days' walk from Jerusalem. And let me give you some more background on lepers. Leprosy was this highly contagious disease, and lepers were forced to live outside of society. I mean, entirely separate from every relational interaction, from all societal gatherings. In fact, they had to ring a bell as they approached people. They were not allowed to worship, which means they were not allowed into the temple. And the temple was the center of all Jewish worship, all Jewish life, in fact, in the first century. They were not allowed to participate. In fact, going further, they actually had to yell, unclean, unclean, as they approached. And this wasn't just to signify that they were unclean physically, but actually spiritually as well. You see, this disease was seen as God's unfavor. And so they had been the recipients of God's unfavor. Therefore, both physically and both spiritually, they were unclean. And they could interact in nothing. They could actually participate in nothing that everybody else could participate in. And so, in this story, at a distance, they've obviously heard of Jesus. They've heard of the miracles he had performed. And so they yelled at him from a distance, "Oh, Master, have pity on us." So Jesus' response is amazing because we don't really understand it where we sit now. But to the first century Jew, who was the primary audience of this story, they would have understood it. Jesus' response was, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." So I need to explain something that we're unaware of, which is this. In the first century in Israel, when someone had recovered from a contagious disease, they would have to go to the temple and they would have to go see a priest. And the priest would check them out, and then upon seeing that they had been healed, he would give them this clean bill of health. And what that clean bill of health would do would allow them to re-enter society to pick up their life. So these 10 lepers, Jesus says, go find a priest, and they take off. And it says in this story that they take off with great faith. Faith is not any problem here. They're not even cleansed when they begin to go, perhaps to Jerusalem, perhaps sprinting as hard as they could go to get to the priest. But we know at some point along their journey that they were actually physically healed. And I just want you to imagine their excitement. Their excitement. I don't think we could begin to imagine their excitement. We've been isolated a little bit. We've had some of our freedoms taken away. We can't interact with some of the people that we would love to, but for them, this was a life of isolation. This was no physical touch. This was no physical affection. This was people covering their eyes and running, and now they were running back to their life in excitement that they had been healed. They could live again. I don't think we can overstate that. They were free to worship. They were free to work. They were free to live. And all they needed was a priest to say so. And so they rushed to embrace life. Well, 9 did. You see, 1 turned back, and he returned to Jesus, and he did something very basic. He thanked him. Why did he return? What was different in his mind than the other 9? He returned because in his mind, he could not move forward without expressing gratitude to the one whose actions allowed him to do so. You see, and I want us all to get this. One of the first points I want to make today, and I want to hit this hard, so please pay attention, is this. Unexpressed gratitude is like a debt unpaid. Unexpressed gratitude is like a debt unpaid. And that may seem strange to your ears, but we all intuitively know it. We already know it, and let me prove it. Whenever we give a child something, what is the first thing as parents tell him to say back to us? Well, say thank you. When they open up a card and they just look for the money inside, we as parents tell them, well, say thank you. And when they don't, when a child doesn't, and in fact their parent is standing right there and their parent allows them to not even say thank you, we're very aware of something. And what we're aware of is there's this gap. It's like there's this gap in this relational loop and it's incomplete. But I want to be clear that while the person who left the loop, this child, or any of us who don't say thank you, while the person who left the loop open, this gap in the relational loop open, they may be unaware that there's a gap. But the recipient is never unaware. I mean, this child in that example might be clueless, but when I give your child something and they just grab it without saying thank you, I'm very aware of it. And I just feel like, man, there was no closure of this relational loop. It's left wide open. And here's a very important point. You may be telling yourself, this may be you in life in general, you may be saying to yourself, well, of course I'm grateful. Of course I'm grateful. Why do I need to say thank you to everything? Well, let's look at the story of the 10 lepers. In the story of the 10 lepers, how many of those individuals that were healed were grateful? Would you say just one? No, of course not. All 10 of them were grateful. In fact, I can imagine that for the rest of their life, wherever all 10 of them went, they spoke about the day that this Jesus healed them. I bet it became part of their family story, where every time they spoke and got together, they spoke about the day and their gratitude for how this man healed them. Of course, they were all grateful for the day that Jesus gave them their lives back. But whether or not you get this has the power to determine the course of every relationship in your life. And I'll say that again. Whether or not you get this has the power to determine the course of every relationship in your life, because unexpressed gratitude, it actually conveys ingratitude. Unexpressed gratitude actually conveys ingratitude. And if you think I'm overstating this, then I just want you to think about something. I want you to ask yourself, how many times in your life your efforts felt unappreciated because someone just failed to acknowledge them? I want you to ask yourself, how many times your efforts felt unappreciated because someone failed to acknowledge them? The clean house, the prepared meals, the early get-ups and long hours at work, all these gestures that we make to convey love to other people. How does it make you feel when they don't say thank you? Now, I would say this, that your spouse, your child, your boss, I bet some of them would be shocked to discover that you don't feel appreciated. They'd be shocked. They had no idea. But gratitude left unexpressed on their part, it conveyed ingratitude. And what's powerful, more powerful even than that, is that perceived ingratitude, well, over time, begins to be interpreted as a rejection of my efforts, of your efforts, of our contributions. In fact, over time, this perceived ingratitude, it becomes to be interpreted as rejection of my very worth in this relationship. And so the degree to which you close this loop, it has the power to impact every relationship in your life, because the health of every relationship can be gauged by how appreciated and how valued a person feels. And so since it's that important, and especially in this season we live in, where we're spending more time together than we possibly have ever, and where the proximity amongst our goings-on have been narrowed to one house, one home, since it's so important today, I just want to take a look at some of the reasons that some of us just don't say thank you. The first is fairly obvious, that some people, they just have a natural difficulty expressing emotions. Possibly it was due to their upbringing. Maybe their parents weren't huggers, their parents weren't affirmers, the emotion just wasn't spoke of, or maybe it was, but it's just not their personality type. You see, we all have different way we communicate love Everybody has a different love language. Maybe your personality is just not to say thank you. It's hard for you to express that. But what every one of us have in common is the same longing and desire for affirming relationships. And so if you appreciate and value someone, your goal, and I'll say this again, if you appreciate and value and love anybody, your goal should be to take what's in your heart and somehow, any way you can, get it in their head, that they understand it. And you need to understand something. That in our relationships, your reluctance to learn a new skill set, to do that, well, it has the potential to be seen as a rejection of their worth to you. Because what's seen as difficult and then left undone says, well, you'd rather them just feel this way than work on a new skill set, to work on something that doesn't come naturally for you. And that's the first reason that some people don't say thank you. It's just difficult for them. The second reason that many people don't express gratitude is because they're self-centered. But not the way we usually use that term today. It doesn't mean that. Let me just kind of explain what I mean. The 9 lepers who did not return to express gratitude, what were they in? They were in a rush. They were just in a rush to get to the priest, to get cleared to live. And there are people listening today out there who were just like that. You see, you're just in this rush to live. We all know people like this. They're just in this rush to live, just to wring the most out of every experience. They're always planning your next trip. You're always planning your next project. You're always planning your next adventure. But far too often, in your rush to move forward into all of these things, you just forget to recognize the people whose actions have actually allowed you to do all of this. The spouse, the parent, the friends whose sacrifice and commitment to you has actually provided the freedom you have to enjoy these experiences. And so instead, you're like the 9 who were grateful, but whose focus was in getting to the priest, not in giving thanks to their Savior, never taking the time to pause, to return to the people who allow you to move forward. Perhaps that's you. It's not that you're not ungrateful, but you're just in such a rush to live that you neglect to say thank you to those who've allowed you to do so. But the third reason that many of us do not express gratitude is actually the most troublesome of all. You see, some of us don't express gratitude because we're just not grateful. And this heart issue of just not being grateful, man, it's far greater than speaking a different love language or focusing on yourself too much. In fact, in Romans 1, this letter that Paul, the Apostle Paul, wrote to believers in Rome, he mentions that one of the highest crimes for a person is that they're not thankful. And so we're going to read Romans, the first chapter, 18 through 21. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Paul is saying all of us have a reason to give thanks. All of us just looking around, we have a reason to give thanks. But a person who is not thankful, well, they don't worship God. Instead, they worship themselves. A person who does not feel gratitude doesn't worship God, they worship themselves, because the only possible way to not be thankful is to refuse to acknowledge your dependence on anything. And to have no dependence is to be entirely self-sufficient, and that's just not true. To imagine yourself to be entirely self-sufficient, to need nobody, it's not true. It's an illusion. It's a God-like illusion that you have. And people who suffer within this illusion that they are self-sufficient, dependent upon no one, well, the soil of their heart, it has no room for gratitude. Why? Because it's been poisoned with entitlement. Some people who are listening out there, and we all know some of them, and I've been this in my life at certain times, we just feel like people should do things for us. We deserve it. We're entitled. It's what we're owed. Nothing could be further from the truth, and nothing could take you further away from what your heart desires, which is joy. Because if this is you today, if you feel entitled, well, your heart will bear fruit. I can promise you that. Your heart will bear fruit in your life, but it won't be joy. I can promise you that also. Instead, it will be arrogance. It will be heartache. It will be the tears of your spouse. It will be the flight of your friends and the hardened hearts of your children. It will be the death of those relationships which God created and intended to bring you joy because you're not grateful for them. Now, if this describes you at all today, and whether it's just begun recently or if this is something that would describe your whole life arc up to this point, well, I would imagine that your relationships are experiencing some strain. And if your relationships are experiencing some strain, well, it's because you feel people should just do things for you based upon your position, based upon who you are. Well, I can tell you this, that gratitude begins where your sense of entitlement ends, because none of us got here on our own. Or maybe you're just like we started off, and I said that we're in this period where we feel like something is missing, this joy, and so it's something we want, and so we just focus on it. We try to grab it, we try to strain for it, we try to manifest it, to manufacture it. And I can tell you that no amount of effort to manifest joy, to manufacture joy, will bring you joy, because it's impossible to find it that way. Joy is not the engine which pulls everything along. Instead, joy is the caboose. It's being pulled by gratitude. Joy is this natural byproduct of a grateful heart. A heart, well, someone whose thoughts and their emotions give birth to a very specific behavior. I'll say this again. Joy is the natural byproduct of a grateful heart. A heart, their thoughts and emotions, this person, they have, and it gives birth to this very specific behavior where they say, thank you. Thank you. Now, that's our strategy today. Our strategy for this time we live in that I hope will bring you some path to discovering and maintaining joy is simply saying thank you. Thank you to people around you. Thank you for their contributions. You see, saying thank you forces you to consider their contributions to your life. Saying thank you to people, it closes this relational gap that we all feel when we do something for someone and they don't affirm our efforts. It acknowledges our need for one another. It actually leads to joy. And so, I'll end with saying this. In this season of uncertainty, let's be certain. Let's be intentional to say thank you. Because gratitude is the path both to discovering and maintaining what your heart longs for, which is delightful gladness. So there's some things that I want to communicate to you that we're doing as we develop Life Point Church, Sweet Home Life Point here in Sweet Home. One of them is we've actually got a website up and running. We'll continue to work on it, but the website is lifepointsweethome.com. And that's a great place for you guys to go and to find the devotionals, to find the sermons. There's some blogs that we've written. Pretty soon there'll be more music on there. But also, there's a way that you can give online, that you can actually go in there and support us financially. As I've said, we crave your prayer. We need that. But we also, for those of you who want to support what we're doing here financially, that'll give you a way to do that. Also, soon we will have an app that you can download to your phone that will have all the same features on it. I'll continue to let you know how that's going in the days and weeks to come as we develop this. We're very excited about what God is doing for us at Sweet Home Life Point, and we are more than that. We are excited for you guys to be a part of it. If you have any questions at all, my email is lifepointsweethome@gmail.com. Make sure that you stay in touch with our Instagram account. That's a great way to follow what we have going on. We have a Twitter account. Start checking this stuff out. Like I said, we're excited to have you guys along. Send us any thoughts you have. But more than that, please send us your prayers. Thank you, guys.